Hey, FlimsyLunchTray here, and welcome to World of Warships development blog. So this week was actually interesting because I decided to leave an open day in case there was something that appeared for me to record a video on, rather than like something happening and then having to wait till next week with normally how I do the video schedule. And so I decided to push today's original video. It's going to be showcased tomorrow, so if I talk about Wednesday in it, just know it was originally scheduled for today, but it's Tuesday evening, and I am looking at this blog that Wargaming has released regarding submarines. Your questions answered. And oh my gosh, it's a doozy. The player base is upset about this. Well, at least the players I have interacted with, the players I've talked to, and the Discord servers I've talked to. Players are just not happy about this. Even on the Facebook where they had it, players were not happy there either as well. So we're going to look at this and see what Wargaming has said in terms of your questions answered. Okay, so this is a bit of a long blog, so I don't know how much time we're going to take, but we're going to go through this. I'm going to read it for you. Some of you say you don't like to read development blogs, so I'm going to give you my inputs and thoughts as I've just briefly went through this, so some of these things are going to be my first impressions. So with that out of the way, our game has taken an important step. Submarines have appeared in early access. Since the beginning of their development, we have made significant progress and done a lot of work to bring the new class to its current state. We understand it is impossible to make submarine gameplay suit everyone, but we strive to create a comfortable and understandable gameplay loop that will provide many players with a new and interesting experience. Of course, after the release of Submarines, we will continue to work on this new class. Yes, Wargaming, you still have more work to do. However, as we have already stated, for the next few updates after 0.11.9, we are not planning any significant changes. This way, players can get used to the new class, submarines can find their place in the meta, and we can gather the most relevant and accurate statistics possible, because statistics is what matters to Wargaming. Even if the player base is not happy, they're expressing their dissatisfaction with the game, the dissatisfaction with submarines being implemented, with the silent majority somehow pushing submarines still through. Statistics, spreadsheets is what matters to Wargaming, not community feedback. With the release of Submarines in early access, we also want to give answers to the most popular questions regarding new ship type in our game. Why are you adding submarines into the game? Okay, I'm going to actually give you the actual answer because I don't believe this answer. I don't believe it's true. I don't believe it's accurate. The main purpose of adding submarines to the game is to diversify the game experience. So that is their main reason for adding submarines into the game. I disagree. This should be rewritten as, the main purpose of adding submarines to the game is to increase income and revenue by adding more content and another ship class type into the game, in which we can sell premium submarines, early access on submarines, as well as other different types of game events where we can monetize and make more money off introducing this new class. The main purpose to add submarines to the game to diversify the game experience, I'm sorry, I don't buy it. If you're a gaming company, you of course want to be adding more content to the game to keep players interacted. But to say that this is their main purpose of adding something to the game is to diversify the game experience, I just don't believe. It's a stretch. The main purpose of adding submarines to the game for World of Warships, for Wargaming, it's another revenue. It's another source that they can monetize in the game. Another ship class, right? You have destroyers, cruisers, battleships, carriers, and then they started introducing hybrids. That's another type of ship they can monetize, sell. Hybrid cruisers, hybrid battleships, and now they're going to introduce submarines. And heaven forbid, at some point they decide to add a hybrid submarine, because such a thing did exist. Have a submarine that can attack you from beneath the surface, on the surface, or to attack you with its planes above, the surface. So, I'm sorry, I don't buy this. They did it for money. You can disagree with me, and that's fine, but that's just my opinion. Adding a new ship type is a very big step for the development of our game to keep players happy and engaged for many years to come. Our game has to constantly evolve and change, and then I would also add in parentheses, for better or worse. A continuous and regular flow of new content, new mechanics, and new gameplay introduces a wider variety of experiences, interactions between players, whether they're for better or worse, both of which are extremely important in a game like World of Warships. The subs have come a long way in testing, almost 3 years since the concept was created. Finally, only about a year ago, subs were added to random battles, and we did not like that. Me and a majority of players I know did not like it. Based on your battles, brought them up to ready release status. And that's a long way to go for developing one ship type, and we needed to move on. So we needed to move on. Whether subs were ready for release or not, we needed to move on. Thus, the next step is getting the submarines into early access. Of course, all this time we've been watching the perception of the new class as well, evaluating many parameters and metrics to make sure we're moving in the right direction. Players' perceptions of submarines varied, but different attitudes towards change are normal. Whatever you need to tell yourself, wargaming. Separately, we should note that the perception of submarines appear to be significantly influenced by the fact of playing on them. Those who played at least a few battles on submarines better understood their gameplay, strengths, weaknesses, and overall effectiveness. The chart below shows how the number of players who were against adding subs to the game permanently varied based on number of battles played on the subs. The data taken from a survey, because everyone likes taking surveys, the 10-minute surveys in your game. And yeah, I'll get back on this. In previous updates, the values and the dynamics are on the same level. So first bar, 0 battles played, 43%. Second bar, 1 to 5 battles played, 23%. Third bar, 6 to 25 battles played, 11%. Okay, the chart below shows the number of players who were against adding subs to the game permanently varied based on the number of battles played on the subs. Okay, this is a survey that they did. They're quantifying their data, but they don't give us what, shoot, I had to do this in college. You can do a survey a number of many ways, but unless you establish the parameters, you can actually, I'm not saying that Wargaming's I've done this, I'm just saying in general, you can establish the parameters of a survey, of a questionnaire, in a way that will help promote whatever topic, subject that you're discussing or you're saying trying to defend, as an example, okay? What is lacking here, in my opinion, because this is not a lot of data, this is not a lot of information. We don't have, okay, the chart below shows how the number of players who are against adding subs to the game permanently vary based on the number of battles played on the subs. I would like to see, okay, how many players were against adding subs permanently to the game? How many players took this survey in 11.8? What's those total numbers? I mean, that's what I would really like to know, because I feel like this doesn't really give a lot of information. And if someone or multiple of you want to make more sense of this survey, the data is taken from the update 11.8 survey. If you want to add your thoughts below, please do, because to me, they don't give you the structure of this survey to know how many players took it, what were the questions on the survey for to add, to understand. But yeah, I'm not surprised that people are not playing submarines. I mean, I've only played them occasionally just to get an understanding and grasp on them. Not more than probably 5 battles in a month at any given time. And I didn't participate in the survey. So I just find that this information, it's lacking. It's not very transparent enough for us to understand. It's more of like we have to trust that this is Wargaming's take on it, even though we don't know what all it was. Okay, so why don't you add submarines only? Why don't you add submarines only to a separate battle type? This is something I've even promoted. When they first brought submarines into testing, beginning of 2021, they had submarine battles. So you could have all classes of ships. I'm pretty sure carriers are still on that. And it was a step for them to introduce submarines onto the live server and to test. And I like the fact that submarines were in their own game type, their own battle type. I could choose if I wanted to engage with them or not. And then, of course, Wargaming's like, well, submarine battles isn't enough for us to actually be a full understanding, so we're going to put them in random battles. So then random battles, if you notice over the years, seems becoming the new testing place, even though they have like the public test server. So I think it would still be a good move. I mean, they can have ops centered around submarines. I would still value a different battle type for submarines. I think the biggest issue is they don't have enough players to support a different battle type. I was talking to some players in a Discord server, and we talked about, you could have total naval warfare, so it could be carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and then you can have, let's call it classics, where it's just battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and that's it. But they don't. The reality is they don't have enough players to, I think, support this many battle types within the game. So creating a ship type that is only limited to only one battle type does not fulfill its main purpose, increasing the diversity of gameplay, and I'm going to add again in parentheses, for better or worse. We want all ship types to be present in all battle types. Oh, in all battle types, like clan battles, ranked, including one for our game, including the main one for our game, random battles. One of our key principles is that if a player has researched or purchased a ship, they should be able to play in the types of battle they want to, with the exception of some temporary events and activities. That is why we tweak subs for balance in our main battle type rather than limiting them to any separate type. If a ship type is limited by only one battle type, it becomes not only less interesting, but also does not fulfill its main goal, increasing gameplay diversity. No. Increasing revenue, increasing monetization of your game. Because if submarines aren't successful, after all the time that the devs have invested into this, it has to produce income. You have to show results for so much time and investment that has gone into this, right? So ready or not, submarines are going to come into the game because it's time for them to start making money for as much work hours, man hours, investment that Wargaming has put into it. And this diversity, they like this word. They almost like it as much as communication. Miscommunication, my apologies. As mentioned, is a key factor for such live service games as World of Warships. Shotgunning. At this point, shotgunning is not widespread. Okay, it's not widespread. It's still doable. They nerfed the range of the arming time of this torps from submarines. They extended it, so you couldn't just surface. The idea you couldn't immediately surface and just throw a bunch of torpedoes inside of a carrier, cruiser, battleship, destroyer, whatever. So I was like, okay, let me test this out. I got into one battle. I shotgunned a destroyer and I shotgunned a cruiser with as a German submarine. I think it was the tier 10 one. I still shotgunned them both. Yes, the distance is slightly farther now. Like the homing torps, I think it's 0.5 kilometer, and then the torps that hit really hard are 1 kilometer, but still. Like if you know basic concepts, you can still shotgun people. They say it's not widespread now. I would like to know how they can tell it's not widespread now. The individual's players' experiences play a large role in the outcome of using this tactic, as well as their ability to anticipate the steps of the enemy and change their tactics in time. Certainly, we have seen various videos of experienced players using shotgunning effectively. However, such players have a significant impact on battles using other ship types as well. So they're justifying it, okay? Excuses, and can effectively implement various risky tactics. On average, there will be many factors in battle that prevent most players from effectively shotgunning enemy ships. In addition, over time, players will gain experience and better understand how to counter submarines, which will also make it more difficult to use this tactic. I mean, it's hard to avoid someone who just steps right out in front of you with a shotgun and, like, shoot you. You know, over time, you'll figure out how to dodge. Yeah, I doubt. Therefore, we believe that in real battle, shotgunning, although applicable, will rarely happen. Okay, Wargaming, we'll see what you think. We'll see how things go. As we mentioned before, we are not planning any significant changes to submarine gameplay, their settings, or their interaction with other ship types for several updates, after 11.9. If, however, these updates are over, we see shotgunning has become a widespread problem. We will address it as part of future changes to the new ship type. All right. Oh, this is going to be a fun one. Anti-submarine warfare on Dutch cruisers, Leone, and Okhotnik. Currently, we do not plan to add ASW on Leone and Okhotnik. Dutch cruisers, however, will receive depth charges. Wow, finally. Finally, they decided to add depth charges to Dutch cruisers. Now, I was watching a Twitch World of Warships stream. I'm not going to say who it was, but they were saying that the players in the Twitch chat were angrily bringing up Dutch cruisers, and this is recent. This isn't like a couple weeks ago. And they were bringing up the fact that it was hard to be in a Dutch cruiser and deal with submarines. And they're like, no, you can deal with them in Dutch cruisers. You just have to figure out how to be better and get more experienced in how you interact with submarines, okay? I was on the public test server. This was a month ago. Myself and two of my other clanmates decided to get on public test server. We wanted to earn community tokens. And they had a combat mission to earn naval community tokens for Dutch cruisers. So naturally, we all got in the Golden Lions, all three of us. They also had a combat mission for submarines for naval community tokens, and we don't do those. We do everything else but anything that involves submarines. All three of us died because of one submarine. That submarine shotgunned two of us, my two clanmates. Myself, I avoided maybe 2 of 4 torpedoes, and I had to turn and cut the throttle to avoid the torpedoes, so I wouldn't get like death struck. I think it was like 6 torpedoes. And because I made that maneuver, guess who I'm showing broadside to? The battleship sitting 13, 14 kilometers away. Whop, instantly dead. All three of us died because of that submarine. 2 directly, 1 myself indirectly. Okay, they need depth charges. I mean, this was like, you go back to when they first started bringing submarines into the game. I mean, Georgia didn't have depth charges. Massachusetts, so many ship classes. I think less than half had depth charges. And the community was pretty outraged, and they're like, okay, fine. We'll give all the other classes, the ships, depth charges, except Dutch cruisers and Leone and Okhotnik, okay? So as we mentioned in the devlog, when creating models of premium ships, we use the following approach. If a ship was historically built to completion, we make her in-game model correspond to the real ship according to its status on a specific date to the best of our ability. In reality, Leone was not equipped with depth charge launchers or any other means of dropping depth charges. As for Okhotnik, we designed the ship as 1917 according to the project, without any significant changes, and according to the project, the ship was not supposed to have anti-submarine warfare. That's why these ships have no depth charges in the game, and we have no plans to add them at the moment. Really? This is the company that will use historical realism on whatever to justify their decisions, like how they nerfed the AA on Palio Emilio, because that's what was needing nerfed on that ship, was the AA. They nerfed it down to her historical accuracy. This is the same company that will use historical realism arguments. And then this is also the same company when you're watching Twitch streams, when you have community managers and other people, either game developers, who will say, why are you getting upset? This is a video game. It's an arcade game. Of course it's not going to be realistic on whatever reason. Of course. It's a video game. What do you expect? So Wargaming uses the historical realism whenever it benefits them, for whatever narrative they want to push, for whatever decisions they land on. And then they use the it's a video game argument when they're trying to counter historical realism accuracy that players will point out, like submarine speed, right? As for researchable Dutch cruisers, we plan to add depth charges on them. Okay, researchable. So does this mean the premiums are not getting them, like the D7 Provincia? This will take some time since we need to update the models of these ships. Okay, fine. Therefore, we're not ready to share the exact time when it will happen, but we will surely inform you once we are ready. How do you fight submarine if you cannot deal damage to it? Damage is just one of the ways to interact with the enemy. At the same time, ships are not always able to interact in this way with every possible target. Cool. There are several options for interacting with a submarine. The first is inflicting damage. The vast majority of ships are equipped with depth charges or depth charge airstrike. Submarines on the surface and at periscope depth can be damaged by shells. ship and aircraft torpedoes, bombs, and rockets, but there's no direct way to do damage. But if there is no direct way to do damage, it is worth relying on allied support. And if I'm laughing, you probably know what we're thinking when you hear that statement. Relying on your teammates. That's what you do in World of Warships. You rely on your teammates to help you. And using other countermeasures. Many ships are equipped with hydroacoustic search, which can detect a submarine at any depth. And then they've taken this away, they've added it, they've taken this away, they've added it. Subs can also be detected by surveillance radar, but only if they're surfaced, via the signs of submarine's presence, fuel spills, their oil slick spots, and ping launch effects. You can determine the sub's approximate location, change position, and avoid its attack. I can know that there's a submarine in a certain position, and it does not mean that I'm able to avoid its attack. It doesn't mean I'm able to avoid its attack just because I know it's there. After all, a submarine's dive capacity is limited, and sooner or later, it's first to surface and it'll become vulnerable. That is true. That is good that they've kind of nerfed the time of how long a submarine can be underwater, because before it was just, when they first introduced submarines in the game, it was like forever, and so you'd have a match dragged out. Your team would be winning, and there's just a submarine left, and the match gets dragged out another 4 or 5 minutes because the sub just runs, hides, and is underwater. They even had that issue with bots and co-op, I think. So why did you decide to keep nullification of sonar ping sectors via the damage control party? This consumable is already used for many tasks. When nullifying sonar pings, damage control party is serving the same purpose as it does when fighting fires and floodings. By using it at the right time, you can avoid or mitigate damage. Therefore, we consider damage control party to be appropriate countermeasure, because they had homing torpedoes from submarines used all the time in World War II. Totally historically accurate. Instead of a submarine that pings the target, it could be, for example, a light cruiser that sets multiple flyers on the target actively using HE shells that would, quote, overload the damage control party to a similar extent. Yes, a submarine hits the target with a ping more often than a cruiser sets fires. However, there's no need to nullify the sector after each ping hits. You only need to do it when torpedoes at a relatively close distance so that you can evade them after nullifying the sector and avoid receiving damage. Okay, this is super tricky. One is, it depends on how an inexperienced player of submarine who uses homing torpedoes, he sits there and he pings. It's up to you to figure out if he's an inexperienced or experienced submarine player. And then you know, okay, probably about the third or fourth ping, I need to go ahead and use damage control party. And you can try to avoid them as soon as you see the torps, but that's still really difficult to try to avoid them. The experienced submarine player will launch his homing torpedoes, he'll let them travel some distance, and then he'll ping you once or twice, if he pings you at all. But when they do homing, you wait, you ping once or twice, and they catch you off guard, and then the torpedoes are actually closer than what you realize. So this is part of probably the story of players need to get used to submarines in World of Warships to figure things out, but each player is different. A very experienced submarine player might not even hardly use homing torpedoes. So you have no idea they're even coming, right? You don't even know he's there. I've seen people get completely obliterated by players, submarine players, who don't even use homing. So you have no idea he's even there when he surfaces just over half kilometer or 1 kilometer away from you, or if he's launching torpedoes at you from 6-7 kilometers away, periscope depth, and not using homing but using the hard-hitting ones. You have no idea he's even there. So that's just, and that's what submarines were for. They were for ambushing. That was their type. And I think that's why, probably even myself, when you want to be tactical and utilize position and you're getting spotted, you don't know what's spotting you, if it's a destroyer, if it's a submarine, or submarine just ambush you completely and you had no clues or hints he was even there before, it's a pretty frustrating gameplay experience. I will say that. ASW for hybrids. As we already announced, Devlog, we plan to depth charge airstrike on the new US hybrids branch because more players were running planes in the game. We will closely monitor the progress of testing, and if the concept appears to not be excessively strong, We will consider adding depth charge airstrike to hybrids already present in the game. At what distance do acoustic torpedoes stop homing? And are there any plans to change them? It's noticeably harder for destroyers to evade them. The distance at which torpedoes stop homing depends on the type of ship, the tier of the sub, and the number of sonar pings hits on the homing sector. On average, it ranges from a few hundred meters when homing at destroyers and submarines to 1.5 to 2 kilometer when homing at battleships. We have no plans to change these distances at this time, even with the fact that homing cutoff distance for destroyers is short. Their fast reloading of the damage control party and their high maneuverability allows them to evade acoustic torpedoes. Okay, that's another issue, okay? An experienced submarine player, I've watched them. I've watched many experienced submarine players playing when I'm playing in random battles and such. They don't fire, like if you're a German submarine, you don't fire all your torpedoes at the same time. You might do 2, like really close, wait 5 seconds, fire the next 2. Wait another 5 seconds. Fire the next 2. Okay, you space them out, so when that destroyer player, if you're trying to torpedo him as an example, he sees those first 2 torpedoes coming, he blows his damage control party, and he successfully avoids those first 2. You ping him again, there's still 4 more torpedoes coming after him, okay? And your damage control party is on cooldown, like it's not ready to come back up yet. So there you go. Why does it take so many depth charges to destroy submarines? Why does it take 24 depth charges to destroy a submarine? That's what I want to know. Depth charges do not always inflict the same damage to a submarine. It is worth remembering that sometimes depth charges can just cover a submarine with light splash damage. In that case, more hits will be needed to destroy a submarine. In update 11.9, we have added special ribbons to show how many depth charges cause full damage and how many cause partial damage so that you can better evaluate the effectiveness of an attack. In addition, as with other armament types with depth charges, there is an option to avoid some of the damage for the target so as not to go to port after 2 successful hits with depth charges. To do this, the submarine can execute maneuver, submerge deeper, conversely surface so that the depth charge only hits with splash radius and does partial damage. So that's how you can avoid that, but then you're exposing yourself if you surface. Nevertheless, within the changes made not so long ago, depth charge airstrike had the number of depth charges per payload reduced, but their individual damage increased. We will evaluate the possibility of reducing the number and increasing the effectiveness of the ship-mounted depth charges, just like we did the depth charge airstrike. How does damage from ship drops, depth charges, and ASW airstrikes change with distance? At what depth do depth charges explode? The farther distance from the depth charge detonation point, the less damage the submarine receives. Common sense makes sense. The splash zone for depth charges is a sphere with a certain radius, and we know that the carriers who get the automatic ASW have a greater radius of damage than all the other types, so that's cool. Both types of depth charges have a splash zone that covers the entire traversable depth of the sea, but the ship-mounted depth charges have a radius twice as big, but which makes the splash zone wider. The damage inflicted on a submarine depends on the distance to the center of that sphere, the point at which the depth charge explodes, as well as the type of depth charge. If it explodes near a submarine, it does full damage. If the charge explodes further away, the submarine receives incomplete damage. For ship-mounted depth charges, it is always 33%. In the case of airstrike charges, it can be 50% or 0% if the submarine is at the very edge of the splash area. In this case, the submarine will receive the flooding status and with a certain probability of critical module damage. So that's why sometimes you get flooding, but no damage, and you're like, why did my depth charge? It says I did a hit, but I got no damage. And the partial and full hit ribbons is helpful. I do like that, but it's still weird. The depth at which charges explode, the speed at which they sink, and the time before they explode differ between ship-mounted and airstrike depth charges. Depth charge airstrike charges are slower to submerge and faster to explode. Ship-mounted depth charges submerge faster and explode after a longer time has passed. Do you plan to increase efficiency of destroyers against submarines? Could they have a choice between depth charge airstrike and ship-mounted depth charges? Okay, that's a little strange. There are no such plans at this time. That makes sense to me. I don't feel that destroyers need the depth charge airstrike. I think ship-mounted is just fine. The relative damage score, the fraction of the enemy ship's maximum HP that you inflicted on the enemy to subs is about the same for destroyers, cruisers, and battleships. Changing the type of ASW armament on destroyers is also not planned. Yes, depth charge airstrike is indeed easier to use as it can be launched from a distance and with a stable frequency over the course of the battle. To effectively hit a submarine with ship-mounted depth charges, you need to get close as possible to the target, which makes this type of armament more situational. However, ship-mounted depth charges make up with this higher, quote, accuracy, power, and the ability to do a higher amount of damage in a single drop. And if you look at the data for the entire battle, both of these types of ASW weapons are close in effectiveness. In addition, the presence of depth charges on destroyers is due to the balance and gameplay needs. And additionally, the image of a destroyer dropping depth charges on subs is exactly what submarine hunting is associated with in reality. Okay. Here's a realism argument. Here's a historical argument, okay? How do you plan to solve the skill gap problem of different submarine players? Currently, the difference in skill among submarine players is on par with the rest of the ship types. Okay, that's understandable. Skill differences between players become an issue when there is a significant gap between the battle efficiency metrics of different player cohorts. In the case of submarines, the difference in skill across player cohorts is on par with the rest of the ship types. As an example, let's compare the difference in win rate between different player cohorts on submarine and destroyers, the closest ship type to submarines in terms of gameplay. The graph shows the increase in win rate difference for different cohorts of players compared to players with an account win rate lower than 47%, or as Wargaming might say, in an accidentally seen developer's screen on his monitor is just plain bad. Okay, blank, 0%. Players with an account win rate of lower than 47%. Okay. Orange, players with account win rate of 47 to 51%. Green, players with account win rate of 52 to 56%. Purple, players with account win rate above 57%. So if there's a value of 10% for green bar, it means that players with an account of win rate 52 to 56% have win rate 10% higher in this particular ship than players with an account win rate lower than 47%. As an example, let's compare Tier 8 and Tier 10 submarines with three most popular destroyers at these tiers. Okay, so the first graph you see here is Tier 8 destroyers and beneath is Tier 8 submarines. Okay, so Kagero, Benson, Akazuki, and here you can see, of course, they staircase up. Tier 10 destroyers, Tier 10 submarines, in terms of the performance, follows the same route. So the more experienced the player, the better they are. They tend to be with submarines, so they don't see an adverse effect. So let's go again. Increase in win rate difference for different colors of cohorts players compared to account with win rate lower than 47%. Submarines destroyers. Okay, so this is statistical data that they're just showing. I understand. I see potato players in every class in World Warships, so it's not surprising. So they're saying it's staying on par with how players interact with other classes. It's not like terrible players are doing really good in submarines. I think that's what they're really trying to say here. Why don't homing torpedoes have dispersion? In fact, acoustic torpedoes do have dispersion. It may seem to be absent. They added like a very minute dispersion, but it's really slight. It's weird, but they did. It may seem to be absent, but this is because submarine torpedoes are launched one at a time, like on British battleship or British ships. Also, these torpedoes are clusters because they home in towards a certain small part of the ship marked by a sector rather than at the whole ship. If you're talking about all acoustic torpedoes being too compact, and if all or most of the torpedoes hit the target on a successful launch, this is indeed true. However, this density of torpedoes has a downside. In the case of an inaccurate launch, a timely nullification of the homing sector, or just a simple maneuver, there is a high probability of avoiding all the torpedoes at once. Besides, each ship part has its own health pool. If it runs out, that ship part takes less damage. It's the damage saturation, so the more a certain part of a ship gets damaged, the less HP that you are getting as an enemy, as a player off the enemy target. Accordingly, even if the torpedoes hit the target, subsequent hits to that part of the ship will cause less damage if the HP of that part is depleted. So like on a destroyer, I had a clanmate, he was really angered. He dumped all of his torpedoes at an enemy destroyer, and he was in a destroyer. And the way that the enemy destroyer was maneuvering, when he dropped his fan torpedoes, they all hit the same part of that destroyer. And then after the second hit, the following torpedoes caused no damage because that whole area that should become damage saturated. So he still died even though that enemy destroyer ate 5 of his torpedoes, but only took damage from 2. So that's damage saturation. Are there plans to reduce the speed of subs? There are no plans for this at the moment. We are happy with their speed. You don't have to be happy with their speed, but we're happy with their speed. So they took like 1 or 2 knots off the speed of submarines, and then they have this new skill, enhanced propeller shaft, something like that. So I think it's if you have less than 50% of your dive capacity remaining, you get like this buff. Almost kind of reminds you of Brisk, but different. So then you go even faster. So you just let those submarine players go to your back spawn and kill your carrier player, basically. And that's why Wargaming is adding automatic ASW for carrier players, because that's exactly what a lot of submarine players are doing, and I had no quarrels with that. The submarine's lower speed combined with their not so high weapons range would make the gameplay of the new class boring and reduce their effectiveness. Much of the time in combat, a submarine would not engage the enemy and would have fewer opportunities to retreat or change the direction of attack. Okay, we're almost to the end. Are there plans to make balance changes to ship based on the strength of ASW armaments? Yes, ASW as well as AA, main battery reload time, are some of the parameters by which ships can be balanced. Recently, we unified depth charge airstrike for all cruisers and battleships equipped with this armament. Not only does this make it easier for us to adjust depth charge airstrike in the future, but it will also make it easier to balance ships by this parameter. There you go. Why do surface subs take damage from depth charges while the rest of the ships do not? This is a gameplay assumption. At one stage of testing, ASW was used by surface ships against each other to do damage. However, we wanted the ASW weapons to only be used against submarines. That's why we disabled that option. However, this does not mean that we have completely abandoned it and will probably return to it in the future, but with several tweaks. Okay. This is a gameplay assumption. At one stage of testing, ASW is used by surface ships against each other to do damage. However, we want the ASW weapons to be only used against submarines. Because if you, during convoy game mode, you could actually use the airstrike depth charge to do damage to the enemy convoy ships while you're waiting for your battleship guns to reload, cruiser guns to reload. But I think that wasn't intentional. I'm pretty sure that was a bug and they didn't mean to do that. So that showed you that they were tweaking and looking at it. Why don't you add AA to submarines? What, you're going to put 2 40mm Bofors that have an AA rating of 10 on a submarine? At the moment, submarines don't have the need for AA armaments. Submarines could have very limited AA armament mounted, which would be ineffective. Yeah, it would be, unless they gave it some sort of stupid rating. In addition, it is important for a submarine to remain undetected in order to play effectively and to shoot down planes. The sub would have to surface, becoming detected and therefore vulnerable. The detectability range of ships by air is small, averaging 2 kilometers, so the submarine can easily avoid interacting with aircraft. If detected, submarines' primary defense is to submerge, as an aircraft cannot detect submarines at maximum depth. So you have to be maximum depth not to be detected. Because of these factors, submarines don't need to rely on AA to defend themselves from aircraft. Nevertheless, the need for AA armament on the submarine should arise. We return to this case. Okay, I'm going to be nice. There are several things Wargaming has said we are open to. They have said that, okay? So it's kind of a way out, or if we need to change things, we were wrong, it's a way out. It's the same way like in the very beginning when they started testing submarines in the game, where they said, yes, submarines do not fit well within the game, then we will not put them into the game. That's what they said at the beginning. And here we are in early access, ready for release. So overall, to me, it's just kind of like reasoning for Wargaming to justify their decisions. This is what we did. This is why we did these things, regardless of what you, the community, thinks, says, or gave feedback for. And also that we care about money. Why did we add submarines to the game? The main purpose of adding submarines to the game was to diversify the game experience. No, the main purpose Wargaming had for adding submarines to the game was adding more content into the game, that they can therefore monetize and increase their revenue earnings by selling early access to submarines, new submarine lines that are introduced into the game, early access events. It's just another ship type. It's another part of the content in the game for them to monetize and make money off of. If their main purpose of adding submarines to the gameplay is for me as the player to increase and diversify the game experience, that's kind of crazy that they care so much for me as a player that they want to help diversify the game experience. Okay. Now, I'm not labeling all of Wargaming, the developers and stuff, as being they don't care about the player base, they don't care about the game. I know there are those who do care about the game, but when you have higher management calling the shots and saying, you know, submarines are ready to release into the game now because we say so, essentially, we need to make money. You've spent too much time on this. It's time for them to be released in the game, ready or not, for better or worse. They need to be introduced into the battle. We need to move on. There's a long way for developing one ship type, and we needed to move on. There's the answer. They added submarines to increase profit. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I just don't like that. I feel like they could have, I mean, if they said that, that would have made players very angry and irate. But I mean, realistically, why would you add more content? Why would you, as a game developer, add more content into the game if it didn't make you any money? Just to simply diversify the game experience. I don't buy it. I don't buy that. I'm sorry. I disagree. I think it's a lie. So, I mean, you've even seen players on the Twitch stream have been super upset. You've had on the EU, you know, this one guy saying, well, we see all your negative comments about submarines, but what do you want us to do? What do you want us to do? There's nothing we can do, right? It's like 2 clips of that. And then you have this fun one. This was back in 2014. I don't want to play the video because I don't want to get like copyrighted and like not be able to show this. But this guy is basically, they looked at adding submarines into the game and he said they did not just fit. Maybe I can play like a short clip of this. I'm not going to zoom in.
Submarines in the game.
What the destroyer does is attack you with its really, really awesome torpedo force.
There are no submarines in the game. We looked at it.
They looked at it, they tested it out, it didn't make sense. And he says, you know, when submarines would surface, they were just way too vulnerable. Didn't make sense in the game. I'll link this video in the description below if you want to watch all this. I think the main reason why Wargaming changed their mind to add submarines into the game was the submarine event. Was it via a Halloween event? That was super popular. And then the higher ups were like, whoa. We shrugged off submarines way too early. Look at the player base. They love submarines. And my argument is players liked, and because I've had players who do not like submarines as in the game now, but they liked that event who played back in that day. And they liked it because it was his own separate battle type. It wasn't in random battles, wasn't in ranked. Wait and see. Submarines in ranked, heaven forbid they come in clan battles. But it was his own separate gameplay. It was his own separate battle type. So people were cool with that. And then now we have submarines as where they are. So submarines, your question is answered. I'm going to stop the video there. I don't even know how long I've been recording for. Let me know your thoughts in development blog. Yes, probably a little ranty. I'm a little salty with, in my opinion, you can disagree with me. It's fine. If you disagree with me and you decide to do some comments, please do so respectfully. I will have a respectful conversation. We can agree to disagree. We can exercise manners in our conversations. But my opinion is I just dislike submarines. And it's not because I don't like change. I understand change is good for a game. There's new things to be added, new content. But the change needs to be done well. Wargaming has showed us repeatedly and over time that they do not implement change into the game well. When they introduced the battle camera, the new battle camera, they broke multiple things within the game. It didn't need to be changed. It worked fine. They add a new battle camera type. What do? We get railguns. What do they do? Shells are now falling short because they put a delay time on when you fire guns. Free look doesn't even work right. So they break multiple things in the game. They fix things that don't need to be fixed. when Wargaming does reworks, they did the Commander rework 10.0. That was a very bad time. They wrecked secondaries on brawling battleships. It was pointless to even consider brawling because they had the skill Deadeye in, encourage players to not brawl, hang way back, so on and so forth. They did it poorly. They did the change poorly. So, I don't know. So, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you appreciated the video, let me know. Give the video a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, feel free to give it a thumbs down. That's why those things are there. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I'm pretty positive. I try to focus on more positive things in the gaming, trying to help you as a player if you're a beginner or an intermediate player. Make some memes, like to make y'all laugh. So every now and then there's these type of things that come up, and it's pretty hard to ignore them. And some of you like to know my thoughts on things, and these are my thoughts. This is my reaction to World Warships development blog on submarines, or questions answered. So until next time, take care.